homes, and they're what? 75 feet away from this old motel. This is literally the view of these wonderful homes. Is this the back end of this motel? And this is the back end. There's a little kid playing. They're probably staying here for a month or so. No shoes, playing in the snow. Big TV going. There's Mom. So sometimes when you drive back here, especially at night in any of the motels, you'll see an open door. And sometimes there'll be somebody standing in it or just looking out and going in. And that's basically the invitation. So if you pull up your car in front of that open door in some of these motels, you just wait a moment to see if somebody comes to the door and create the right kind of eye contact. Maybe she'll come up to the car, or maybe you'll just talk to her, and you go in, the door closes for 15 minutes. And that person staying in that room can, pay for another night staying in the motel. So again, that's not necessarily trafficking, because that's somebody doing it voluntarily for survival. Survival sex work. Often doing it for food, for rent, or just taking care of their kids. Let me just get out of here. I just lost my voice for a second.
Yeah.
What are we doing on time, Felix?
34 minutes in.
Okay, so we better go to 50 now. Is this good so far?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's terrific. Yeah, quite informative on what you did on the Berlin Turnpike too.
Yeah.
Started off with.
It is pretty interesting. So the history, when I was researching the book, the history I found out about this roadway really fascinated me. A mail airplane back in the 1920s had to land on the highway because he broke down. Babe Ruth was driving to New York City, to Boston with his wife. They broke down in the car. He took the train and left her here.
Left her?
Left her here.
Oh.
And George Cohen, he was an actor and a. I just dropped my mic, I think. Sorry about that. It keeps doing
Is the belt buckle on it?
yeah. I think it's just the handset. There we go.
Okay.
So George Cohen, who was a Broadway actor, producer, big name back then. I don't even know who to compare him to nowadays, who would be even close to that. But he's actually one of the few Broadway actors. In fact, he's the only Broadway actor to have his statue on Broadway. If you're standing in Times Square, where many people take their photos, some people don't notice the statue of a man right in the middle of Times Square. That's George Cohen.
Oh.
And he would rehearse his plays opening for Broadway here in Hartford. Hartford is a very wealthy city. People love the theater, and they would go and see his plays for, as they worked out the details and rehearsed. This was about 1913, and he was bringing his writer and the main actor of a new play and his daughter, his young daughter, up to Hartford. And they were going to drive up to Bridgeport to take the train into Hartford, but there had been a really bad derailment and a train accident out of that train station when they got there. And there were literally people hurt and bodies everywhere. So he said, no, we're going to take the car up. They took the Berlin Turnpike, drove too fast, hit a horse and carriage, rolled the car. Everybody survived, but his daughter was hurt. He was in the Hartford hospital for days and days. So there's been just the history of the accidents on the Berlin Turnpike is pretty amazing. So as we're coming down here, we're coming through Newington. This is, of course, the State Department of Transportation. There used to be a petting zoo here, and I don't know what the total number of drive-in theaters there used to be, but I know it was at least half a dozen.
Oh, that many.
Yeah, there are quite a few. This is the largest gun sales place in Connecticut. And we won't say its name, but this is one of the more notorious motels. And as I said before, when many of these started, just after World War I, and before World War II, many of these motels were huts. Now it kind of looks okay. They've built a few. They've had a couple expansions here, and but if we drive over here, and I think you can get video of this without identifying anything. You see, there's been families here. They're making snowmen over there, so people stay here for a while.
Yeah.
But you see these little oddly shaped huts down here, which have been built over the years, and these are all rooms in the motel. So this two-story thing is a motel. That isn't real stonework. That's kind of an asphalt fake stonework. But you see these kooky things, they just sort of fit them in wherever they could over the years.
Oh.
I mean, this would never get zoned now.
No.
But then this one over to the left, a little porch on it.
That's a house too. Huh?
Yeah. Oops, I might be coming up the wrong way.
Yep.
Oh, he's gonna back up. What a nice person.
Yeah.
And as we get closer to the road, they look a little bit better. Thank you. So I'm thinking of some of the other myths.
I have to ask you first.
Yes.
What got you started into surveilling about the Berlin Turnpike, about child trafficking?
That's a really good question, specifically here. So I really learned about trafficking when I was working for some faith-based organizations in New York. And these were big organizations. We would go all over the world doing work and helping disaster relief and helping kids. I would see this is back in the 90s, and I would see human trafficking without even knowing that it was actually human trafficking. See examples of it in Russia and the Philippines and Haiti, blatant examples of it. I came back here and we were making a little documentary about a foster care mother in New York City, and she was caring for a little 5-year-old girl named Karen who was HIV positive, and the foster care mother was wonderful, and unfortunately little Karen died when she was about 7.
Oh.
And I went to the funeral, and the city worker was there who handled her case. And she had seen the little documentary we made about this foster care mother and Karen and about their relationship and how that'll happen. And she said, Karen, the little girl, was one of the lucky ones. And she must have looked at my face because I was like, how could a 7-year-old who died of HIV, died of AIDS?
Lucky.
Yeah. Who barely spoke ever. And she said, well, we found her because 2 days after she was born, her mother was trying to sell her for $300 in the city for drug money.
Oh.
And I said, well, how often does that happen? And she said, oh, that happens every day, and not just in New York, but you go to any city. And I felt in that moment just stupid for not knowing something so horrible and so monumental. But also in that moment, thought to myself, everybody should know what I now know. I mean, this has got to be something we know about, and we have to address. So from that moment on, I just kept looking and investigating, and eventually, this federal trial that took place in Hartford that I wrote about had so many stories in it from the testimony, Silas Dean Highway, the Berlin Turnpike. And I suddenly realized, okay, I have to know what's going on here. It's not just New York City; it's everywhere. And you'll often hear the phrase, human trafficking happens in your own backyard. Well, it happens in your own backyard, absolutely. But where it happens most is right here now. I mean, anybody with a smartphone can go on websites and literally order somebody just like they would off of Grubhub or Uber Eats and have them brought to them. This field here that's for sale used to be one of the other strip joints. So that's one of the other myths, is that, if you don't see people who look like, Julia Roberts walking the streets, then you don't have a prostitution human trafficking problem. Well, for every person who's still walking the streets, and some people still do, that's a whole different culture within that world. There are thousands who are available online. And if you think about the advantages of the internet, you don't have to wait for nighttime. You don't have to wait for good weather to stand out there. There's there's none of the problems with walking around and just seeing who picks you up. You can do it all day, 24/7, and it's with total anonymity. Nobody sees your car driving or anything like that. You can pay with a cash card. You can hide it very easily online. You see some of these other hotels. Now, I did notice the other day, I mentioned Marie earlier, who met her pimp and 4 hours later turned her first trick with a John. That was at one of the motels here on the Rome Turnpike. In particular, this one. The last motel going north. This house happens to be in Weathersfield. And I'm just fascinated by the fact that this thing is still here. Because it's probably one of the longest buildings on the Berlin Turnpike. It starts there. Sorry.
Yeah.
I almost hit you with my pointing finger. It starts there and it goes all the way down there.
Wow.
All the way. But you see, they fixed up the part you can see from the road. They fixed up. Kind of. This is fixed up.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But you see, all these cars are here. So people are just living here pretty cheap. And doing whatever. And down here, not so fixed up. This is what it all looked like until a couple of years ago.
Wow.
So, I mean,
What a
look, those
difference.
windows are broken and open. They haven't even moved the snow.
It's not painted. And
Can you imagine
Are
inside
they-
these places?
Are they even using it?
No, I don't know. But I mean, there's no footprints going from the snow. I don't know what's in the back. But this building's over 100 yards long, and you're right next to a very nice little suburban neighborhood in Weathersfield. So that's where she met her pimp. And these guys, I mean, they know to go to places like this, not to kidnap, but to recruit. I'll try to do a little tricky thing here. So this is the very northern end. It actually stops being technically the Berlin Turnpike a little bit up that way.
Okay.
And then you just head into Hartford. To the left is a very large cemetery where J.P. Morgan is buried and Katharine Hepburn is buried.
Really?
And many people don't believe me when I say Katharine Hepburn is buried on the Berlin Turnpike.
Because I thought she lived in New London or something.
She lived in Old Saybrook, but
Old Saybrook.
her family was from Hartford. And her father was a doctor, and they lived up here, so they had a family plot in that very lovely cemetery. So going down this way, we'll see several other hotels, especially that were used by the pimps and traffickers that I talk about in the book. One of the motels, it's an interesting thing to describe. So, in the days of legal slavery, the colonial American slave trade, really only very wealthy people or well-established period of people owned slaves, because quite frankly, they were really expensive, very, very expensive to buy. And so, unless they produced money for you, that's what the whole purpose of being was. You didn't have one. So slaves back then were thousands and thousands of dollars in that era's money. But two of the women who testified against Dennis Paris in the trial that I wrote about were traded between two pimps for $600 each here on the Berlin Turnpike. And they'll do that quite often. One trafficker will just tire the girl, or just she's too high, or she's not doing well, so he'll trade him off with another and we'll switch around. There's all sorts of deals all day long.
They'll buy them and trade them just like slaves.
Exactly. It's a modern day slave trade. It's just much less expensive. And here's the thing about this. So people say, well, it's easy and it is. It's very easy for the pimps, the traffickers, to buy a girl to enslave and then sell to other people. And it's very easy for the Johns, the customers, if you will, to buy them. However, it works like slavery of old, much that way. It's just so much less expensive because one of the major differences is in the days of old, you owned that person and they worked for you and you made all the money from their efforts and their labors. What happened now is, and why human trafficking became so huge over the past few years, along with drug use and along with the internet, is that it's a safer law to break than selling drugs. Because think about it, if we were driving on the Berlin Turnpike right now and we had, I don't know, a few bags of heroin on us, that would be illegal. And if somebody caught us with that, we would go to jail in due time. This one's really interesting. We'd like to try to get heroin snowed. This is the one where you just really have to look in back. And you can see on the corner of the building how many cars have hit it.
Yeah.
Again, zoning was not a problem back then. Somebody plows this up. But you see back here is where you really want to come for if you want to stay somewhere discreetly. Because no one's going to see you back here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're at this very high point of the whole place. And I'll come back to that when I talk. I should have talked about the massage parlors. But going back to one of the reasons people have gotten into trafficking, even guys getting out of jail for drug charges will do prostitution, human trafficking, be a pimp. Because if you're driving around with heroin, you're going to get arrested. If you're driving around with a girl or two girls in your car, you're just driving around with two people in your car. There's nothing illegal to that.
Right.
But unlike drugs, you also get your product back after you sell it. So they're not selling these people, they're renting them. Because it's 100% profit. You don't have to restock your inventory like you would if you were selling drugs. It's a far more profitable, much safer proposition for people who want to get into, who want to break the law and do this. The other good reason is, from their perspective, every cop, every detective, every prosecutor, every judge knows exactly what to do with drug cases. Both possession and intent to sell. They really don't know what to do with a human trafficking charge. Trafficking doesn't have the institutional knowledge within law enforcement, prosecution, and the judiciary to really go after it in the way it deserves to be gone after. So another reason why it's gotten so huge.
So they can't even catch up to it.
No.
In an alley.
So think about it. You're a detective, you're overworked, you're maybe in Newington or Berlin, maybe state police, and you've got 20 drug cases on your desk and files, and you've got one human trafficking case that you don't know how to investigate. But these, you've done a bunch of them. And another factor is, with the drug cases, say you get one and you get a good bust. You bust a dealer, maybe you bust the supplier. Well, the asset forfeiture of that case goes to the police department. So say the person has a couple of cars, maybe a condo, a lot of bling, and some cash. Your department gets all that. And so you get a promotion, your department gets a bunch of money. The human trafficking case, you don't really know how to investigate it. The prosecutor doesn't really know how to prosecute it. And the victim gets the asset forfeiture. So there isn't that motivation there to, really win on all levels. So there's a couple massage parlors here on the Berlin Turnpike. We won't go drive through because that's just a legal mess.
Yeah.
But like the motels, the people who frequent these places know to go in the back door. They absolutely know that every one of these places will have a discrete back parking lot. The door to that place, like a plaza. You know what? I think there is one in here. Originals. Oh, I said the name. I think you might have to edit that out.
Yeah, you got to take that one out.
So I'll show you how these all work. They find places that are specifically have a back parking lot that is discreet enough where people from the main road can't see who's parked there and going in and out. So here's a plaza, very, very typical strip plaza on the Berlin Turnpike, which I'm driving the wrong way on.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's always this thin or if it's the snow.
Oh, the snow.
Yeah. So it's a very typical strip mall you find all over the United States. And like I said, there is a website that lists all these massage parlors. They're Asian run. They're run by organized crime out of Flushing, Queens, New York. And there's 200 in Connecticut. There's well over 1,000 in New York. There's well over 2,000 in Florida. Over 5,000 in California.
Wow.
And you can go on this website and not only rate them, but you can see how many each state has. And you can see a photo of the front of it. So there you see a front of one. It says open. It's got neon flashes. You really can't see inside. But if someone is really wants to go in there and have that kind of massage, if you will, they know to drive back here. And this is the way all of them work. I've never seen one that doesn't. And this is not what I spend a lot of time training police to do. You drive in the back, and this is the door you go in. And sometimes the door will have the name of the business on it, or it'll be propped open. But the customers will know this is definitely the door you go in. You don't go in the main door.
Wow.
Yeah. So the difficulty in addressing and ending all of this is, where do you start? Because it's like shoveling ocean water. There's so much of it. How do you begin? And it took me a long time to reconcile the answer to that question, is that you have to start where you live. I know a lot of people, well, that's, I guess, one of the other myths is people think this happens somewhere else. And one of the reasons I wrote the book called The Berlin Turnpike and centered it very much in Connecticut is, as you know, many people think around the country think that Connecticut, all of Connecticut is like Greenwich, Connecticut. It's just rich and nothing bad happens there, and we're all just, our noses are all turned up.
Right.
So I realized if I wrote it about Connecticut, then other people in other states would go, well, if it can happen there, it can happen here, which it does, especially because of the internet. So with so much of it happening, you have to, one, show people that it definitely happens here, but then it's okay to address it not on a massive scale. So many people get into work about fighting human trafficking, and they'll go to Cambodia, they'll go to Costa Rica, and they'll ignore what's happening in their own town because they don't know it's happening in their own town, and it is. So how do you address that? I finally came to an understanding that it has to be, you can look at it as an economic model. Because you have somebody selling a product, in this case, it's a human being. You have the person being sold, and then you have the person buying it. And it's kind of this circle that goes around. And they all have to sort of communicate with each other. As I said, this is one of the things I bring up in the classes.
Yeah.
There's really almost no way to motivate the pimp, the trafficker, or the victim to stop, because he's making money and lots of it, and he loves this lifestyle, and he's either making her do it or she's been coerced into doing it for drugs or money or to keep their family safe. The only way to stop it, to Ruth's motive, is to go to the purchaser, the buyer, the male, and to make it so severe a punishment that people slow down, and hopefully someday stop taking the risk of buying sex in the first place. And that's why you see many places decriminalizing sex work or drastically reducing the punishment against selling sex for the person who's actually being sold, and putting the legal onus and blame on the person buying it. So that a guy who 5, 10, especially 20 years ago could easily buy sex and really face nothing if he was caught at it, because they would always blame the victim. They always blame the girl being sold, which is very strange. Now the law is beginning to say, let's blame that person who's buying the sex.
Yeah, finally.
And that will, in theory, reduce the demand on the market and dry up the market entirely. So, from what I've seen, if done correctly, that can work. But again, like anything these days, it takes up a whole political nightmare. Felix, how we doing?
57.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
we're good.
so our guys
Perfect.
are good. And I won't bring up the QAnon stuff. That'll just, I don't know, unless you want me to. If you need more time, edit some of this out. Do you want me to go into that?
Yeah.
You do?
Well, how much time do you have?
Oh, no, I mean, I can explain it between now and the time we get back to Stu's, which is a couple minutes.
Sure.
So about a year ago, I got an email from someone that I've known for several years, and they had just watched a documentary and were very eager for me to see it, wondered if I had seen it, and wondered, and they were very excited because they felt they had just discovered the reason that child trafficking, sex trafficking happens in America. And that was a theory that there is a politically motivated, and I'm not kidding, Satan-worshipping group of global pedophiles, when I'm not kidding, were killing babies, having sex with the babies, killing them when they were most afraid, and then drinking their blood for longer and better life. That was their theory. And when I first saw this documentary, I realized, well, this is not how it happens at all. Because I've been studying this and working against it for 20 years, and these people had just been given this very salacious story about how this happened, and we're going to finally end the child trafficking because we're going to take down this, they call it a cabal of politically motivated, devil-worshipping, cannibalistic pedophiles. I mean, can you add one more bad thing into that description? I guess you could put the word zombie in there, but they actually didn't go that far. So many people know this as the preeminent conspiracy theory of the QAnon group, which is, of course, we're hearing a lot about now because of their how they manifested politically. But this was their very first introduction to a lot of people, and what brought a lot of people into believing in their worldview was that there is this, again, global, wealthy cabal of baby-killing, sex-trafficking, pedophile Satanists. And, sorry about that.
The foot pedal wasn't working over here.
Yeah, no, it's working fine. Yeah, exactly. It's hard to be a passenger in your own car.
Yeah.
So when this person sent this video to me, I knew what it was, and because I'd heard a little bit about it, and I had to wait a day or so to answer because I was so incensed to say that, listen, to believe this is the way it happens is dangerous. It's a profound disservice to the way it actually happens. We will miss victims. We won't find them because if people think that this cabal is going to be taken down, boom, the child sex trafficking problem is over with. That is not true. It is a complete falsehood. And we know that because there's never been a shred of evidence that it's there. But it becomes a belief system, as so many things do in our lives, that it doesn't need evidence. It doesn't need logic or rationale. It becomes a belief system. And once somebody has that in their mind that this is how it works, it would be like talking somebody out of believing in their life, the religion or the theology they've lived with for their entire life. They will not let it go. And there are still millions who believe this is how child trafficking works. And that belief is really dangerous for the victims that are still out there waiting for somebody to rescue them.
Yeah.
And these folks think that somebody else is going to do it for them. And you can't. You have to do it yourself. If you want to do this, you have to do it yourself and do it locally. That's what I did. I grew up near the Berlin Turnpike, and I focused everything here. I've been around the world doing it. I've been to Iraq and Afghanistan and all these other crazy places. I really hope that picked up everything. But it all comes back to the Berlin Turnpike.
Oh. You've been all over there and it comes back to here?
Yeah. This is because it's the same thing. It works the same way
Yeah,
everywhere.
same way.
Yeah.